Next, I'd like to bring today's resident small business data expert, Holly Wade, Executive Director of the NFIB Research Center, and Bob Cusack. Thank you.
Holly, thanks for joining us.
It's great to be with you. Thank you.
I wanted you to tell us a little bit about what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. So I've been with the National Federation of Independent Business Research Center for almost 20 years now. And we have a number of kind of standard publications where we survey small business owners on a regular basis, monthly. We have roughly 300,000 small business owners as members. So we have a large pool of folks to survey and ask them questions about business operations and how they're doing in their local economy. So we have current updated information looking at the small business sector, and then also looking at kind of policy impacts and how they impact small firms. Because as the previous panel talked about, very different from how large corporations, large businesses are impacted by policy. Small business owners are particularly hard hit oftentimes.
So 20 years, that's a long time.
It is a long time.
A lot of changes in that research.
Yes.
What does the research tell you right now, coming out of a very volatile time in this country?
Certainly. So it was interesting. One of the speakers had talked about how the general population, many of them think that we're currently in a recession.
Right.
And for small firms, small business owners also, many of them, over half, say that we're currently in a recession. All of the kind of national numbers indicate that we're not, but it is a strange time to be a small business owner, operate in this environment. While sales are looking pretty stable these days, it's not particularly, doesn't feel good oftentimes because of the challenges that they're facing that are unique to them and haven't been experienced for decades.
Let's talk about those challenges. Access to credit's got to be pretty high on the list.
Actually, for our members, it's not the most pressing issue. So while there are certainly populations of small business owners that are having a hard time with access to capital, not specifically with our members. Our members, 24% of them are saying that their single most important problem right now is labor. Finding qualified applicants to fill those positions, and also another 24%, inflation. So inflation and the labor market are the two biggest challenges that we hear from small business owners at NFIB.
And in the data, are you seeing any trends that those problems are getting better? I mean, from a macro sense, the workforce issue is not going to go away for a long time.
No.
But more recently, because I know, and I think a lot of people in the audience and watching on thehill.com know of a time when they went to a restaurant and it was very difficult to get any kind of service. I mean, the labor shortages during COVID were pretty bad. So are we on an upswing or kind of not?
So the number of small business owners who are planning to hire, increase their staff has slowed down a bit from record level highs. However, for the volume of small business owners that say that they have an unfilled job opening that is just sitting there waiting for applicants to apply for, that is still at record level highs and hasn't eased up much at all. The pressure of increasing compensation for retention and recruitment has eased up a bit, but it's still one of the biggest challenges that they face, including inflation. So while it's eased up, it's still a very challenging part of business operations for those who are looking to hire and expand their business.
Let's talk about inflation, how it affects small business owners. We know how it affects us as consumers. We go to the grocery store and we're paying more money.
Yes.
How does it affect small business?
So for small business owners last year, when energy costs were skyrocketing and impacting them, that was one of their major concerns. However, for many of them, still inflation more broadly is impacting their business. As I mentioned, still 24% are saying it's their single most important problem in operating their business. And the challenge is absorbing those costs. So for small business owners, their first hit is on earnings. That's how they're absorbing costs, lower earnings. And then they're trying to figure out how to best pass those costs along to consumers by increasing their prices of their goods and services. But the unique aspect of a small business owner is that they have to make all these decisions themselves, generally speaking. While larger companies have departments and people to manage how best to do these adjustments, for a small firm, the business owner is the one with all of these challenges. So figuring out how much to raise prices, how much to absorb those input cost increases, the frequency of increasing those prices, and figuring out how to stay competitive in this very challenging environment.
We've had some bank turmoil,
Yes.
certainly in the industry. What are people saying about that you're surveying?
So I guess this was in April, I believe, we surveyed small business owners, a random sample of our members, asking them about the recent banking turmoil and whether that was impacting them personally. And for the most part, it wasn't impacting them directly. However, they were concerned about the financial stability of their bank, of surrounding banks in their area. Many of them reached out to their bank to make sure that everything was okay. Many of them told us that their bank reached out to them, which was good to hear, telling them that everything is okay, that there aren't problems that they should be concerned about. But it was a level of stress for small business owners in thinking about what this might mean to them if there were larger impacts. For most small business owners, we're hearing that while they're able to generally access the financing that they're looking for, it's certainly becoming more expensive for them to do that, and also the added paperwork, which is always a frustrating aspect of operating a business. The more paperwork you fill out, the less time you have to operate your firm.
And that was going to be my next question, just the frustration that you have seen in polling and surveys of Washington.
Yes.
Can you talk about that? Has that increased or maybe decreased or stayed the same over the last 20 years?
So the amount of paperwork, the regulatory environment on a state and federal level has increased as far as the burden placed on small businesses. They are always concerned about how much of that is impacting their ability to operate their business, the time that's required to comply, to figure out what they might need to do in adjusting business operations, but also that paperwork part of the compliance aspect is a problem, and trying to figure out what paperwork to fill out, how long it takes to do it, and if they're doing it accurately. So all of those measures over time have become more, every additional regulation that they have to comply with, it's very rare that one is taken away.
Right.
So the buildup and accumulation of all these regulations is certainly a challenge for them. One of the areas that they're most concerned about right now is making sure that some of those tax provisions that were in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act stay permanent for them.
Right.
And that their tax liability isn't increased when all of that sunsets in a couple of years.
Right, and then going back to the regulations, some people have floated that if we're going to have a new regulation, and mostly Republicans, but we should take one away, but it hasn't really caught fire yet. But other than, and that is a big question now of what's going to happen with the Trump tax law, will it be made permanent? Obviously, that's not going to be happening anytime soon before the next election. But what else are you hearing that small businesses are telling you about what they'd like Congress to do other than the tax provisions?
Right now, talking to small business owners, I was just in Jackson, Wyoming, talking to a few of our members. And while they're challenged with inflation pressures and labor, mostly they are asking DC, the federal government, to stay out of their way.
Right.
Not make it more difficult. They're already in a challenging environment in operating their business. So limiting the DC or state regulatory environment and kind of keeping that in check so that there aren't additional burdens on that end would be of huge help for small business owners.
Are you seeing different states, different levels of success because they have less onerous requirements? Like when you survey, are you able to tell, well, this state's doing better than this state? Do you see those type of trends?
Sure. So every 4 years we have a survey, problems and priorities, where we evaluate 75 potential issues of small businesses that they may be dealing with. And we look at a few states specifically. And it's always interesting looking at Texas and California.
Okay.
Those two are kind of at the polar opposite ends of the state levels of compliance and regulatory burdens for small firms. And so for California, it's a lot of labor issues that are particularly difficult for small businesses, and not so much in Texas. So it is interesting to see how small businesses are evaluating their state and comparing kind of the extreme ways of the regulatory environment that they're facing.
That's interesting. I mean, we've certainly COVID has, and we talked about it earlier, how it's changed mindsets, and we're seeing record number of small business applications,
Absolutely.
which is great news. But we've also seen people leave New York for
Yes.
Florida. Are we seeing business owners doing that too?
Anecdotally, we hear about that
Okay.
in large shifts in small business owners leaving. Likely not so much because their business is generally kind of where they set up
Right.
shop. And it's not easy to pick up if you have a storefront or employees and move to a different state.
Unless you're doing that for life
Exactly.
reasons. Right?
If you're
Right.
starting a business, though, it does make sense to kind of evaluate the situation that you're in and see if, kind of where you're thinking about setting up shop makes sense. And there are certainly areas that are more kind of friendly towards the small business sector than others. So in that way, we've seen, as you mentioned, the huge increase in business formations. And so it'll be interesting to see in a couple years kind of where they have set up shop and have, if they've grown and hired employees and things like that, and if those geographic shifts have happened in that way.
James Carville famously said it's the economy, stupid, when talking about politics, and the economy is obviously going to be a big issue in the 2024 election. You've looked at decades of data. Where are we now? Are you confident that we're on the upslope? Because some people don't think so. Most people actually think we're on the downslope. They're very pessimistic.
Yes. So, small business owners, they're always concerned about their business. They're always concerned about the increasing difficulty of operating their business. So when there are elected officials or those running for elected office talking about increasing some of the kind of regulatory issues that might be of concern for them, that's a problem for small business owners, and they are always looking towards an environment that's more supportive of them. And so that's certainly of concern, whether it's in DC or their state. They are looking for those folks who are going to make it easier for them to operate their business. And that's a priority for them.
Going back to the tax provisions that are pending, in covering Washington since 1995, a lot of business interests are like, listen, we need some certainty about the
Yes.
economy, and Congress usually does not supply that because they wait until the last second to decide on anything, whether that's shoring up Medicare or doing tax provisions that are expiring. Talk about that need for certainty, and that hopefully Congress won't do that on certain key economic provisions.
Yes, it does seem like they are generally last minute of doing anything, and that poses some real limitations for small business owners in thinking about the next 6 months, year, 2 years, in either opportunities to expand their business, if they think they're going to have to pay more in taxes, or if the tax environment isn't supportive of them making large capital expenditures. Things like that matter to small business, and if they have some certainty about the environment and what that looks like, then they can proceed accordingly. If they're uncertain, then they're going to have to, many of them wait until the last minute to move forward, depending on the situation. And that's not a good space to be for small business owners. It's stressful enough. It's not helpful to have that added stress in looking into the future and seeing kind of where you should or how to operate your business and how to expand based on DC or a state legislature, not a good situation to be in.
AI, that was the last question I want to ask you. What are people saying about that, small business owners?
So we haven't asked in a survey sense, but talking anecdotally to small business owners, it's still navigating this new world of AI and what that might mean for them. Certainly, there's some interest, especially with the labor shortage, and if there are tools that they might be able to implement in their business to help with productivity, to help ease up some of those labor issues that they're having right now. But it is fairly new and not quite certain on how those technologies might be incorporated in their business quite yet.
On labor shortages, what has helped on that? You know, what is, you said it's eased a little bit, but what has been, why?
So, well, right now, still small business owners are spending a lot more time in their business, in kind of the daily operations, filling in for those unfilled job openings. So unfortunately for small business owners, they are taxed as far as their time, that they're able to do other things other than just filling in for those who they can't fill these positions. But on the labor front, there are a lot of adjustments. When we've asked them about how you've been able to navigate this, it's adjusting business hours, it's adjusting days that they're open, because they need a labor force that is consistent and reliable and showing up. And so, if they don't have enough people to fill that time frame that they used to be open, they're limiting those hours. If they can include or put in place technologies that are more helpful, they're doing that. Thankfully, during the pandemic, there was a lot of stimulus support for small businesses. And so they were able to use some of those funds in capital expenditures that helped improve productivity in their business. That's certainly always something that small business owners are looking to do, whether it can be, a lot of these technologies retrofitted into a small space. I have a friend who owns a restaurant, and he said, a lot of the technologies are for the larger restaurant space, and we're small, and it doesn't fit,
Right.
Until the technology advances far enough where, it can be incorporated in a small business. That's a challenge, but they're doing everything they can to kind of work with what's available to help them operate as best they can with limited staff.
We've run out of time. Please thank Holly for joining us.